Welcome to Lettering Tips Tuesday. Today I'd like to talk to you about a variety of different tools that I use in my practice. And some of this is because I want to share not only just what I use, but that I'm finding that every time I create a piece of artwork or something using a different kind of tool, I actually get better in my lettering. And many of you know that I'm a Neuland ambassador, so I use a lot of Neuland products in my work, but a lot of times I learn how I learn lettering by using calligraphy and sign painting tools and things like that. So I want to show you today some of the tools that I use and how I use them and how they kind of translate. The other reason why I'm sharing this is because on Thursday, Carol DuBosch, she's my calligraphy teacher, my master. She's taught me a lot of wonderful lettering styles. She's going to be showing her calligraphy studio and some of her calligraphy tools and how those translate into Neuland markers. And so you'll be able to see those. Now, you might have seen, I posted on Instagram probably yesterday, today, for Mother's Day, I created this small, actually this looks quite big because it's printed out on 11 by 17, but the original was a 2 by 2 inch. It was teeny tiny graphite card, and I actually ended up giving it to my husband to give to his mother. So this was all done with pencil, and I'll show you what type of pencil. It was just a 0.3 mechanical pencil, a Pentel, 0.3. So this is the smallest pencil lead that you can get. And when I finished with that, I thought, wow, how can I cement my learning? And so then I took this FineOne with a brush nib, and it has 102 ink in it, and I drew this piece. And what I loved about it is that I've kind of used the same type of technique, and of course I had to go much bigger, so I had to think about design, layout, how was I going to draw something bigger but using a different tool. But the original here, like I said, was only 2 by 2 inch. And so it was very, very tiny. And what I was doing was using pressure release graphite techniques, meaning I would draw, and I'll see if I can get some lead out here. I would draw going heavy and then thin and then heavy again. And I would use this technique so that I could get thick, like dark spots, and then light spots, and then dark spots again. And so this is an actual technique that you use in any type of pencil, but graphite, or using a mechanical pencil, will allow you to keep a sharp tip all the time, and I'm working really tiny. But when I moved to using the FineOne, which this has a brush nib, I was actually using a layering technique to make it darker rather than thick, thin, thick. And so that was really fun to be able to say, oh, wow, I can use a very similar lettering style, but then use a totally different tool to create the same kind of thing. And once I got finished, I thought, wow, this is really fun. So I wrote my friends at Neuland a card, and so I wrote Neuland on it, and now I'm having a really good time with this lettering style that I originally learned how to use in graphite pressure release, but then now using with the FineOne. And a couple of other tools that are fun to use that are like the FineOne, that are fine art tools, and I'll go ahead and pull out my roll here. This is my roll of folded pens and some other tools, but mainly folded pens. Ooh, we got an Aquash pen in there. So these are all of my folded pens. The ones here are made by a man named Tim in Portland, and these are still steel nibs. And what that means is that, oops, they actually do come apart. He does these beautiful handles. I think this is made out of myrtle wood. And then there's this brass ferrule here. And then when you're finished writing with it, this is considered a metal brush. When you're finished writing with it, I can take it apart and wash all the parts and put it back together. And love the folded pens. Now, the reason why I have these is because I learned about these from Carol DuBosch, who taught me how to make folded pens. And this is a brass folded pen that I made in her class, just using brass sheeting, a piece of duct tape, and a dowel. You can also make them out of pop cans, beer cans. They're a little bit more flimsy, but they're fun because they do what's called chatter and spit, which means you can you can make them make really cool designs and then throw a lot of ink in a lot of places. This is made out of a piece of aluminum siding. Oops, I think I'm muting everybody here. Yep. Welcome everyone to the call. Feel free to use the chat room if you have any questions right now. I'm just going over my folded pin collection. But this was made out of a piece of aluminum siding. And so most of the tools you can use to create your own folded pen using maybe a pop can, you could just use scissors and a little bit of sandpaper. Whereas with something like this, I actually had to use files and tin snips to be able to create that. And then some of my other tools include, these are all made out of printmaking plates, so they're aluminum as well, and they're Luthis pins. You can purchase these through, I believe it's John Neal Books. And these are beautiful pins that I use for calligraphy. And then these, I don't think these are considered fold over pins, but they are indeed folded over. This is brass. I believe this is brass. I don't know if this is some kind of an alloy, but this is an automatic pin. And automatic pins are going to be flat on the top, as this is brass, so it's flat on the top. So when I think about what would I do, or what would I use acrylic-wise, or Neuland-wise, is I would use either the acrylic markers that they have with the acrylic flat top here, or the big ones. You know, that's got a broad edge to it. So if you see some calligraphy that's created with an automatic pen or a pen that has a flat top like this, or even the fat ones, right? So these broad edges. So a lot of the calligraphy styles that I learn using these pens, and then I translate that into markers. And so anything that's got a broad edge that's really flat like this, you can use these pens. Whereas, again, if you just tuned in, these folded pens are considered what they call metal brushes. And so what the equivalent to one of these pens is going to be an art marker, or it's going to be the Neuland FineOne that I just showed you that had the brush tip. And so those are going to be equivalents as well. And actually, I'm not going to go over a lot of those lettering styles, but Carol will tomorrow in her session. But I do want to show you one lettering style that I designed that you're welcome to check out. It's called Twinkle. And if you go to bit.ly/Twinkle letters, you can, it will take you to Sandra Dirks' website, where she interviewed me back in December, and I created this lettering style specifically for the holidays. It was inspired by a folded pen, and that lettering style is called Wish, because it's slightly different. But this is a serif lettering style that I actually originally used an Aquash brush with, which is, this Aquash brush is a bristle brush. You can see I kind of splay out those bristles there. So it's a nylon brush that can hold ink. And you can actually just put water in it and dip it and use it with watercolor. But I actually put, this says Noodlers on it because I put fountain pen inks in my Aquash pens. Or sometimes I'll put Neuland inks in the Aquash pen. Any really thin ink that can go through a fountain pen will go through this pen as well, or if it can go through our markers. So these are some of the tools that I used for that. Again, you can check out Twinkle, and I'll put this in the show notes if anybody wants to check it out. All right. So speaking of, just a real quick commercial for Carol. These are her tools, and you saw some of those in my collection, but those are the tools that she uses, and these are one for one the tools that would translate into Neuland markers. And so she's going to be showing those tomorrow. If you don't already have access to the class, you can go to letslettertogether.com, and the class is called Lettering with the Masters. If you don't want to pay for the whole year, that's fine. You still get access to all of the past episodes, but you can just watch either her session or single sessions, and those are posted on the website as well when you go to the sale page. So any questions so far about the tools that I've shown you? I have a few more to share, or if you want me to demo anything, I'm happy to. Okay, I have a question. It says, what does the folded pen result look like? Can't tell the Neuland transition. Oh, exactly. Great question. Why don't I go ahead and just show that? I'm going to use just regular piece of paper actually, I'm going to compare the two. So on the hand lettering learning pad, I'm going to show you the art marker, which when I learned how to do folded pen from Carol DuBosch, I actually took the lettering style that she gave me and came up with the brush lettering style that I teach in Unlock Your Neuland Markers. So you can see that's an A, here's a B, and here's a C in brush letter, or art marker. If I were to use an Aquash, it's fairly similar. It's got a lot more bounce in the bristles. They're a lot more flexible, but I can make almost the same lettering style. When we get to the folded pen, and let's see, I'll select this one right here. This is one of my favorites. It's actually my very first Tim folded pen made by Tim. I think his website is timpens.com. And I'll grab some ink so that you can see this. I'm gonna use some walnut ink. Whoops, sorry about that. I'm gonna use some walnut ink. This is not the walnut ink I made, but I do make walnut ink, but it's great because you can dilute it if you wanna use it for practice. It's very inexpensive, or you can make it very, very rich. And so I'm literally just gonna dip it because this is a dip pen. And a lot of times when I'm writing with my brush marker, I'll make what's called a scale, meaning I want to see what are my thickest lines and what are the thinnest lines that I can make. And then of course, we know when we do brush lettering, the rule is thick down, thin up. And so these are some of the marks that it makes. But if I'm going to use, if I'm going to do brush lettering and do it with sort of the style that I just showed you, it's going to be slightly different because it operates differently. So an A may look more like that. A B, notice I've got thicks and thins here. It's a little bit more angular. And when I was talking earlier about chattering and spitting, I can make it do sort of a special thing. Let's see, it looks like my camera's out of focus. There we go. All right. That is a chatter and a spit. And it probably made a really big noise. So what that means is I was pushing really hard, and the chatter, you'll see these little lines that kind of come out. And then of course the spit is where all of that ink just sprayed out of there. And so I can't get that out of my Neuland brush marker, though I can make it do a lot of special tricks too. But yeah, that is what a folded pen can do. And Carol is actually going to show some of her really, really beautiful lettering styles that she does with folded pen. And you can do a lot of different things. It doesn't have to just be this brush lettering style, but it was that learning how to use that particular marker that helped me design, and also studying other kind of brush lettering techniques, design this as my own personal, I guess it's my own personal signature. So let's see, I have another question here. Let's see. All right, any other questions? Feel free to put those in the chat window. I think you can access that through the bottom of your screen in Zoom, so feel free to ask any questions there. Next thing I want to show you is a couple of things around pencils. So I know you all have pencils. That's fantastic. And one of my favorite pencils is the Black Wing, and it comes in black, comes in white, a pearl color, and lots of other different styles. This comes from their volume collection. But when we're writing in monoline, say with a pencil, you could do things like italic, which is very similar in terms of shape that I just showed you for the brush lettering. But now we're doing monoline, which is just one line. So how would that translate to a Neuland marker? Well, you would just use a round nib. And so this could be a number 1, it could be a FineOne. And the advantage of learning italic is actually it helps you improve your own handwriting. Of course, you want to slow down to learn it, but then it will help you with just your rapid capture. So italic is a great one to learn. Paula Fagerberg, she teaches italic, and that's what she uses all the time. And then another pencil that I wanted to show you, this is coming out of my pencil collection here. And is this carpenter pencil. If any of you have ever used a carpenter pencil, because of its wide, broad edge, it will make a very thick line. And so you can treat something like that, again, thinking about that broad edge markers. Again, you could do italic with it. And this is probably traditionally how you see italic. You don't normally see it in monoline, but you can certainly practice it in monoline. And you could also do Neuland hand with it, right? And so we know that Neuland hand is about 3.5, and I say 4 pen widths high because we're working so quickly with the marker. We want to be able to make some mistakes or have room, some wiggle room for mistakes. But something like this, I love practicing and playing with a broad edge pencil. Oops, sorry about that, bump. Because I know that I can easily equate any kind of broad edge marker like that into, or broad edge tool like that into our marker. So again, and if you've watched the Unlock Your Neuland Marker series, or if you've taken one of my workshops and you've learned how to write Neuland hand, the trick here is to keep the entire broad edge flat at all times. The faster we go, sometimes that doesn't work. And sometimes when we're working with graphite, we have to keep that edge really, really sharp. Otherwise, we get some fuzzy edges. Drawing shapes and cutting out shapes can help you with your lettering style. So what do I mean by drawing your letters? So when I first learned Neuland hand, Carol DuBosch taught me to actually draw the letters before I wrote them with a pen. And this isn't my first time I drew them, but I did this recently and I wanted to share this because I originally learned how to draw the letters. That helped me understand the shape of the letters. And then I took a pen to them. And this one I'm actually using a Pilot pen, a Pilot parallel pen. And so I've used a couple of different inks and I was kind of mixing them together. And I love this exemplar so much. I enjoyed making it and I loved seeing it so much. I think I posted on Instagram that a few weeks ago I went back and I said, I want to redraw the letters using graphite. So again, I'm using pencil. I probably used a black wing like this, just a regular pencil, to draw out these letters because I liked the way, I could see the way they looked. And by drawing them, you really understand what the letter forms look like. And one of the things that Carol says is, if you've drawn a letter, you've been there. And so it's like you've already been on a journey, you've already moved all the way around a letter. So when it comes time to draw it with a pencil or a pen, or that broad edge that you wanted to later, you could literally just draw one line, but by drawing around it can help too. Something that I created, actually created this 2 years ago and I've never used it. I know if you guys ever want to play, this would be a lot of fun. I have a box here full of letters that I made into stamps, and they're Neuland stamps. And so I made them. First I took foam. This is like foam with sticky on one side. And then I had access to a laser cutter. And so I cut out all these block shapes and I glued, and it was just sticky, but I adhered that to the form. And then for the longest time, I couldn't find, I made these, I think they're 3 inches high, because I thought, wow, I could just stamp my titles of my charts for graphic recording. And then it would be so easy, I could just stamp them. And then I realized, well, that would probably actually take more time trying to organize the letters to stamp them out. And I couldn't find a stamp big enough, a stamp pad big enough, until I found this really big one. And I think the stamp pad ended up costing me like $12, and I've never used it because I didn't know what color to put in it. I was afraid. So if any of you are interested in playing with these sometime, I'd love to have a class on these, or just how I created them, or if we do something in person, it might be fun to do that too. But by cutting them out, drawing them out, helps you really understand the letter forms.
Yeah, just show one time how you make the outside shape really. And yeah, that's even interesting because you can use this if you want to have a black background or a colored background, and you want to keep the shades,
Right.
the shapes white.
Things. When I'm going small, say if we're talking about hierarchy and you have, say, glance, which is going to be your titles, scan, which is going to be maybe the topics that are in your, and right now I'm referring to graphic recording, glance, scan, read. This is going to be our content, and I oftentimes refer to this as the rapid capture, and then study. And these are really small, and I call it actually not small, but fine print, right? So if we're talking about hierarchy, and you're wondering how would you draw a letter out like this, for something like scan, and I just want to draw, maybe it's a Neuland E. It looks like a block letter, but I can kind of stylize it a little bit. I'm just going to draw the outside of that. But that takes so long. I had to draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different lines, 12 lines, right? But say I'm going to go, and that's going to be in the scan. But say I want to do something that's in the glance, like the title really big, and you want to make sure that you keep your the whites of the paper, and you want everything else to be reversed. I'll take some kind of object. I usually, the way that I teach it is I take a fat one like this, and I put 2 pencils, and they need to be identical. So if you can use 2 new pencils, that's great. Usually I use tape, but in this case, because we're going to go really fast and I don't know where my tape is, I'm just going to use rubber bands. And this is temporary too. What I would do is, and you can just put 2 pencils together if you want, or if you can put it between other objects. I have a friend who uses Post-it notes, and she puts Post-it notes in between or something. And what you do is you line those 2 things up, and it's a little it's kind of wobbly when you're using rubber bands, so I do recommend tape. And you would hold it in such a way that when you go to write your letter, I'm going to go ahead and draw that out like this, and then finish that up. And you may not see it too well on the screen, screen here, so I'll go back with an outliner, and I'll show you where my lines were. I'm not going to follow all of my lines because some of them have crossed. You can see that. But I will, now I get to decide how I want my letter to look. Now I can really make it look stylized. I don't have to follow the shape exactly. But this is where I get to define my letter. I get to decide, where do I want lines to touch? Where do I not want them to touch? Maybe that was a bit of an oopsie there. And then I can decide, all right, do I want to color in or outside of the lines, right? So you can put a drop shadow on this if you want, and then just have the white sticking out. Or you can decide, okay, I actually want the outside of the letter. And that's really the beauty of doing it with pencil, is that you've preserved that inside as white, and now your outside can be a color. Does that answer your question, or did you have something else?
Thank you. No, that's great.
Yeah, and it's so much faster, right? I didn't have to draw each one of those individual lines and think about what's the shape of an E. I let this tool do the heavy lifting for me. That's why I use bigger tools to make bigger letters, because I don't want to have to construct them. If you watched last month with Ben Tinker, he talked about how to construct letters, and he is an expert at constructing them. He knows his letter forms very well. I don't have it down like that. So he gave some really great tips, but I still use this because it's a bit of a cheat and I like to work fast. So this would be at the glance or title level. So this is measuring about, you're looking at a 5-inch letter. That's huge. Yeah. And so if you wanted to make it smaller, you just put whatever you put between your pencils are going to be smaller. Okay. And the best way to decide is, and I didn't do this at the beginning, but the best way to decide to say, okay, if I'm doing Neuland hand, for instance, this is 1, 2, 3.5 inches high, or 3.5 pin widths high. I just make a quick pin scale to say, okay, if I'm going to do Neuland hand, it's going to be that big. And then maybe you take this out and put in something smaller and do a pin scale and say, okay, I want my letters to be 4 inches high. And so I'm going to use that. One of the things that I've told my students is make yourself a guide, right? So if you have some of these, well, any sheet of paper, whether it's in your sketchbook or whatever, sometimes I use the little sheets of paper from Neuland to make little guides so that I can have them as I'm working and say, okay, how big do I want my letters? Then I can use it as a guide.
I have a problem if I put the space between words. It's not consistent at all. Okay. Sometimes it's a big space, sometimes a little space. And I'm wondering, I read now you should kind of always think about a O to put in between the words. So you always have a consistent measure on your mind. What would you put in between the words?
Right.
Do you have any other recommendation?
Yeah. Actually, yes. And I hate the answer. It all depends, but it all depends on your lettering style, right?
Yeah.
Which lettering style are you most interested in?
The architect.
The architect, of course you are.
That's the writing, the fast writing for the main content.
Yes.
Because the titles kind of, you mainly just have like 2 words. So, okay, if the distance is not so great. The problem is if you have to have distances all the time to keep it a little bit more consistent.
Exactly. And what you're talking about is the consistency in space. That's the first place it goes away is when we're working really fast. And so I will use architect, and then I'll show you why it's different with other lettering styles too. So with architect, let's see. I'm just going to write, I'll start out with my usual pangram. What is it? Jovial graphic recorders. Okay. So when I go to make a space, I want to make sure I'm not writing off the page, between words. Okay, a couple of things to note here. Because I'm working so small, it's okay if some of your letters touch. Notice how this was nice and spaced out up here. I was really thinking about my architect lettering style. Down here, it started to become more of my handwriting. It started to morph a little bit because I wanted to go faster. And so notice that my letters started to touch. I do that sometimes because I know if they touch a little bit, they're going to be consistent. And I wouldn't normally have titles touch unless I wanted to bring the viewer in. Because once we get really close to, once we get closer to the chart, your letters can touch because you're closer to the chart. It's more readable. But from far away, not only is it not readable for your letters to touch, but you couldn't read a small letter like this anyway. So when you're doing architect, I would say yes, because a lot of the letters are square or shaped more like a square, then you're going to put a square or a perfect circle, like an O, in between those words. So that's correct for architect. If you're going to go larger with architect, again, probably using like a big one, you're going to want to make the letters space further apart. And in architect, it's definitely a circle or a square that's going to go between them. Other lettering styles, like my regular rapid lowercase lettering style, the shape that's going to go in between those are pretty much going to be the same width as a letter N. And so every lettering style has a family letter. And that family letter is usually an N or an O. The problem with O's are because they can be so stylized, sometimes they're a narrow O and sometimes they're a very round O. And so O is probably, if you're just writing, chances are an N or an O are going to be the letters, the space that you're going to put between each word and between sentences too. I mean, you could put a little bit wider, but we're not really writing sentences when we're graphic recording. The other thing to consider is, so this space between letters, in case you guys don't know this, but space between letters is called kerning. The space between words is called tracking. And then the next one is letting, which is what are your spaces between your lines of text, right? So if you're putting words listed this way, the term is called letting. And that's really important when we're listing things out, just as important as how the spaces between our words, because sometimes if you have 2 or 3 things, say you've got, here's 2 things, and then 1 thing, and then 2 things, this one here looks like it's all by itself, and then it's not part of the list. And so it's important to have that consistent letting. Otherwise, people will try to disassociate information. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's also very hard. If you're fast, it's very hard. It's like every time it's...
Yeah. So what are some of the things that go out the window when we start going fast, right? Spacing, and that could be kerning, tracking, or letting. The letter forms, right?
And going down.
Yeah, that's right. We start going down or going up. Sometimes we forget that we go so fast how large to make our letters. And so if we have letters that have counter spaces, they start to fill in, right? Because we've either written too small or we've used a marker that's too big. You know, if you wanted to write that small, then maybe you choose a smaller pen, and then check it out. My counter spaces aren't filling up because I just used a smaller pen. Yep. All right, or you can fix it by going larger. All right, any other questions? Okay, so this is awesome. I love this question. It's not what I thought you were going to ask, but that's okay. So we know that if we write with the marker with our fingers correctly in the hole, if that's comfortable to you, and you're just writing, it's almost as if, I mean, of course, when I write, it's almost flat. That's what it shows up for me. You might find that when you start writing, the chisel may make an angle this way, which means it's going, I have a bit of an angle that way, or you might hold it in such a way that the chisel is going this way. And that's really about your hand position. And I'm not going to ask you to force or change your hand position, but I will show you a pretty neat trick that is going to make you go, wait, what? And that is, if your marker is really old and it's time to replace your tip, which your nib looks pretty flat there, you've used it for a while, you might want to replace it. And you can do it when it's new too, but you can take it out, or you can just pull it out slightly. See how that's a little bit longer? And you can move it and push it back in a little bit. You do want to pull it out before you twist it, because otherwise it's kind of grinding inside of there. But I just changed it, and I'm going to show you what it's going to look like just by changing the angle of the nib, and I'm still holding it in the way that it's comfortable to me. It changed the angle. So you can literally take like a paper towel and just pull that out a little bit. And if you use a paper towel to pull it out, it's a little bit more, it's much more gentle, I would say, than using like a pair of pliers. And then you can turn it a bit and then put it back in. What I've noticed is that when it comes from the factory, if you take that little ball, if you look where the ball is and go straight down, what I'm seeing is it's touching this, like it's in line with that top right part of the tip.
Yeah.
And so if you ever twist one and go, oh no, which way did it go? You can grab another factory one, but they place it in the same place all the time. But the cool thing is you get to change it. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I started to mark them because I don't know which one is the chisel tip. So chisel tips have these marks with me.
Oh, I see. And so you have chisel tip and then you have the round nib, right?
Yeah, and they're like empty, and those are shiny. I see.
Yes,
shiny.
Art markers are shiny. And the round nib, there's also a round nib, and it's so yeah, do you have that too? And it's got a little picture on it, but yeah, marking it makes it a lot easier to be able to see. but there is a little picture. You'd have to really look at it and see. And so, yeah, they definitely make different marks. And so what the most common question I get with the chisel is actually people are comparing it to the round. And the round nib, what we call a monoline, because no matter how I angle my marker, it's going to make the same line, right? Well, that I was right on the tip, so it was a little bit thinner. But it's going to make the same thing no matter which way I'm moving. But when it comes to a wedge nib, it's going to be angular. So notice I can move it all different ways, and I can point the marker, I can move my hand or whatever, and it's going to make thicks and thins, right? And so when people say, I don't like it when I'm writing and I get these thicks and thins, and I look at it and say, well, if that's the lettering style you're going for, and if you're consistent, that's fine, but they're not finding that it's consistent. So what I say to do is, and this might feel funny, you might either have to move the nib, or I actually choke up on the marker a little bit sometimes when I write, when I want to turn it. And so instead of being factory, where it's kind of pointing in that direction, I'm actually going to point it down in this direction, and I'm going to write an E. Oops, hold on a second. I apologize. That's wrong. I'm going to point it up even more. I'm actually going to go a little bit higher than what factory is, but the marker itself is actually pointing in this direction. So let me just circle that. It's pointed up in the upper right. And if I'm working in Architect, and I go, yeah, so it's pointed like this. If I'm working in Architect, which means I'm going up a little bit on my crossbars, then these are more even. See the difference between the first one and the last one? Yeah. And so that Architect lettering style not only helps you with your own handwriting, but if you're working with the wedge nib and you're doing all of your crossbars at that angle, they're going to be the same as your vertical, or very close. At least it's going to look more purposeful. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. And then because I just have it here, we'll pull out the art marker. And one of the things I enjoy doing is I actually like writing with the art marker, not brush lettering. So sometimes I like to do Architect with an art marker. And notice that every time, and I think I showed this in last week's, I'm actually moving the marker. Notice I'm moving it perpendicular to the thick line I'm doing here, and then I'm going to move it perpendicular to the thick line that I just made as a crossbar. So to me, it still is more like a monoline, like what we had with the round nib, but it's a lot thicker. And so that could be used to emphasize a word, make it more bold. There's something that you're writing in this marker, and then you can quickly switch to an art marker, you can make it bolder. And it could be in the same color or in a different color if you really want to draw the eye, right? So if I'm going really slow to do italic with a brush marker, and that's how we would practice, right? We would practice this slowly. But say I'm getting ready to write and I'm doing rapid, it's going to look more like that. But it's still sort of following the italic, or the italic way that she showed us too. And what's great about italic is it has a little bit of a slant, and it's fast and it's rhythmic. And that's where we need to get into when we're doing our rapid rapid capturing, right? We need to keep it rhythmic and slanted and go faster. Yeah, cool. Well, thank you, everybody. Unless you have any other questions, that's all I have. Just another quick announcement. If you want to letter with me again next week, let's see, is it? Yes, May 23rd. I'm going to be going over how to add serifs to any lettering style. And so you can bring all of your Neuland markers. And this is actually on Wednesday, May 23rd. And this is a really long URL, but I will also put that in the show notes. But Sandra Dirks will be interviewing me to talk about the workshop that I'm teaching before UViz. And so in that process, we'll also be talking about, okay, how can we add serifs to any lettering style using any one of these Neuland markers? And yeah, so that's all I have for announcements. Again, check out this video if you want to watch it again and get some of the links to some of the things that I talked about. It'll be on Facebook probably this evening, if not tomorrow. I've got a couple of other projects today I've got to finish up, but I'm happy to letter with you live. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.